Welcome back to another episode of House to Home, a podcast by Family Policy Alliance Foundation. My name is Grace Youngson, and I'm joined, as always, by my fellow team member, Joseph Kohm. And today we have a very special guest with us.
Yes, we do, Grace. So, as our listeners know, we've covered a few stories on our show from the state of California recently. And while we're not a guest-centric podcast on this show, every now and then we like to have a special guest on who can give us some more insight on some of the recent stories or issues that we've covered. And so today we are so fortunate to have Sophia Lorey on with us. Sophia is the outreach director at California Family Council, or CFC. CFC is one of about 40 state family policy councils, which is a network of state-specific ministries and policy groups. And Family Policy Alliance Foundation is honored to get to host this network alliance. And we're actually we've covered one story recently straight from CFC's reporting, which is about Assembly Bill 727 proposed in California that would force LGBT advocacy on every student in the Golden State in school. And we also covered a story about a boy breaking a girl's long jump record in California by 8 feet, which we viewed as a bit of a microcosm for the overall issue of boys playing in girls' sports. So Sophia joins us from California Family Council, and we're so happy to have her. So Sophia, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Grace and Joseph. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. So with that, Grace, I'm going to kick it back over to you to get us started on our content for this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited about this show. As Joseph mentioned, Sophia, we covered that story of a boy breaking a girl's long jump record, and I think that's a really dramatic example of the differences between boys and girls as they compete against each other. I know you're a former college athlete yourself, and you've covered this issue extremely closely. And actually, you were recently on Fox News with Riley Gaines talking about this, which we're going to take a moment to listen to a clip from that segment.
Several states now passing laws to protect parents' rights and keep boys out of girls' sports. Let's bring in two former college athletes, California Family Council Outreach Director Sophia Lorey and the host of the Gaines for Girls podcast, Outkick contributor Riley Gaines. It's great to have both of you on here. I want to put this up because this is Gavin Newsom's famous soundbite about the trans athletes, and I'll get your take on this, Sophia. Watch.
Would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. It is an issue of fairness. So it's deeply unfair. I completely align with you, and we've got to own that. It is an issue of fairness, and I think Democrats have lost that.
But Democrat Senator Lisa Slotkin says he's just trying to get sparks flying.
Absolutely. I completely agree it's an issue of fairness, but at the end of the day, Governor Gavin Newsom will say anything to gain political power. He wants to make a 28 presidential run, and he needs to put action behind these words. I mean, he signed in 2020 SB 132 allowing males to be in female prisons. He doesn't care about fairness.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Wow, you did an amazing job there, Sophia, on this issue. Tell us, where does this story fit in the broader context of boys in girls sports, specifically in California?
Yeah, so I wish I could say in California that this is the first time we're seeing that. This is a one-off example and that this normally doesn't happen. But that's just not the case. In California, we've actually had a bill in place. It was signed into law in 2013. It went and it was put into place January 1st, 2014. It was signed by then Governor Jerry Brown. And this is what opened the floodgates for this. We then saw that bill allowed for you to play in sports, use restrooms and locker rooms based off of gender identity and not biological sex. So although this is kind of a brand new issue that started happening in 2018, 2019, we really saw explode in 2020, 2021. This is something that has been in place and allowed to happen for a while. And so, again, this boy beating out girls by 8 feet in a long jump. I mean, it is a prime example of how different males and females are and why we need to make a stand to protect girls' sports. I know for myself, luckily, I've never had to deal with playing against a male athlete. Although I played soccer and I grew up with 3 brothers who also all played club soccer, which was great to be able to practice with them and train with them. And yet when COVID hit, I was sent back home from college and we were kind of in that weird lull of, when are we going to go back? Are we going to have soccer games in a week from now or not 7 months from now? And so we had to start training on our own, keeping up our fitness test scores and being ready to get that call back at any moment that sports are back on. So during that time, I'd go out and I was training every day of the week. I was running 6 to 7 miles in the morning, doing weights in my backyard, practicing all my fitness tests. I was about 20 years old, and my 14-year-old brothers, who sat inside and played video games and didn't do much with their time, my mom made them come out and train with me twice a week. She said, okay, you guys also don't know when soccer is going to start back up for you, so go out and train with Sophia twice a week. So again, I am getting some of my best fitness scores. I'm in the best shape because it's all I have to do with my time is work out and get ready for soccer. My 14-year-old brothers would come out with me. We would run our fitness test, and they would beat me every single time as I'm training as hard as possible. And they're playing video games or sitting inside or playing Monopoly and things like that. And they still beat me. And then when we finally went back to school and finally went back to soccer, I was on a team with 25 girls, and I was scoring in the top 3 girls for every single fitness test. Yet my 14-year-old brothers were scoring better than all of us. And so a prime example of truly how different males and females are when it comes to athletics, especially once boys start to go through puberty or finish going through puberty, which is about where my brothers were at the time, that they are faster, they are stronger. And this is an issue happening up and down the state of California, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a shame to hear, but that insight is helpful, and it's a good reminder for our listeners, who many of whom I know are sports fans, but many may not know much about sports, and that's a good reminder. Which is why also in our coverage of this on a separate episode of this story, Sophia, we talked a lot about a phrase we've heard called weaponized empathy, which is this idea that you should feel so bad for these poor boys that wouldn't it be nice for them if girls could just knuckle under and let them take their spots in sports. And we feel like what gets ignored in this conversation so much is how it must feel for girls to be asked to have their roster spots threatened, their opportunities, their scholarships, their championships threatened by this boy. Their feelings get lost in the translation and in the conversation about this. So I know you said you've never had to play against a boy in soccer besides your brothers, and thank God for that. But you're a lot closer to what that might feel like and look like than Grace or I and most of our audience. So we want to use this as an opportunity to hear from you. What must it feel like to be asked to do that, to compete against a boy, to put your health and safety at risk and all your hard work for all those years at risk? Try to tell our audience, to the best of your ability, what must that feel like for a female athlete?
Yeah, before I dive into that, I do want to touch on that weaponized empathy, Joseph, because that's such a great point. And there's some boys that we are seeing make this switch because they want to get first place in whatever sport they're competing in. We're also seeing it happen to junior high and high school boys, that some maybe are dealing with this confusion. And it's heartbreaking and it's sad, and we need to support them in other ways, but we should never sacrifice the safety and fairness of girls' sports because of a boy that is struggling with confusion. And so for girls that are going through this and are being asked to play on the same team as a boy, or being asked to play against a boy, or are dealing with a boy being in their locker room, I can only imagine the harm it does to their psyche being an athlete. For me, playing soccer, it was no matter what happened at school that day, whatever was going on with friends or family, when I got to go on the soccer field, all of that got to be left behind. I got to forget if I got a bad score on my test that day, or forget if something happened, and just really get to play the sport I love. So knowing that these girls are being put in a situation where they just want to play the sport they love, and now they have to think about, oh, even if I trained as hard as possible this week, even if I ate all the right food, got all the right sleep, and did everything possible to successfully perform on game day, it doesn't matter because there's a boy competing against me today. Or it doesn't matter because my spot's taken away from a boy who is on my team. Has to absolutely just ruin their psyche. And I'm sure there's plenty of girls that are just done playing sports because of it. And so for me, that's why I'm doing everything I can to stand against it. I knew at 10 years old, I wanted to play college soccer. And I told my parents, I said, this is the dream. And they got on board. And I knew as long as I trained hard, went to the practices, worked to get to the higher level club teams, I would be able to achieve that goal. Current 10-year-old girls can't achieve that same goal because no matter how hard they work, they're not going to be faster and stronger than the boys on the team. And so you see these girls being put in this situation. And I've received phone calls from parents the day of the girls' volleyball game. It happened in California. It was a boy on the volleyball team. And the parents said, our daughters are trying to figure out half of them are thinking, well, let's compete and let's beat this team so the boys' team is out of the playoffs. And the other half of the girls are, but I heard about that girl named Peyton McNabb who got partially paralyzed in her face because a boy spiked a volleyball into her face, a boy who identified as a girl. And so there's so many emotions that are going into these girls' minds when they should just be at school or doing whatever they're doing with their day, just thinking, okay, I have a game today and I've prepped for it and I'm ready and I'm good to go. And just be thinking about the normal things you have to think about on game day. And so it's heartbreaking to see what these girls are going through. And I know for myself with playing soccer, I was one of the more aggressive players. And so it was kind of a known thing. My teammates would call me the brick wall, or that no one was going to get past me because none of it was putting other people at danger. None of it was unfair or any safety issues going on. But I was going to do whatever I could to stop a goal from happening, to score a goal, to win the 50-50 ball. And so I was willing to put my body on the line against that, against other female athletes. So I know if I was a current soccer player and we got information that we were playing against a boy that day, instead of trying to be like, okay, is that something I want to do? Is that something I shouldn't do? Maybe we should just go in and try to beat that team. I know my coach would have pulled me aside and said, Sophia, and this is something that happens a lot in soccer when we see that there's a girl on the team that's scoring all their goals or a girl that's the faster girl. We pull one player and we say, that's who you're marking all game. If there was a boy on the other team, I am 100% confident any of my coaches would have pulled me aside and said, Sophia, your goal of the game is to mark the boy 24/7 because you're the player that we think could match up with him physically, to which I wouldn't be able to which that's not possible, to which he is stronger. But I think as an athlete and a competitive person, before knowing everything that's happening today, I would have said, all right, coach, I got this, to which could have led to a horrible injury. And so it's heartbreaking. And I truly urge every female athlete that is put in that situation to sit out that game and to not play. And I don't say that lightly because I would love to get one more game with my college team. I would love to get one more game with my club team. I miss the sport of soccer so much. And to ask girls to sit out a game because of boys breaks my heart, but that's how we're going to put an end to this.
Wow, that's so powerful. I think it's amazing how you shared, from such a personal side of things, Sophia. Um, Joseph, did you have anything else to contribute to that?
No, I think that was brilliant. I mean, it makes me empathize with my sister a lot too, Sophia, who went through a very similar story, very similar love for her sport, and very similar work ethic to you. And I think knowing what we know now after the cultural ascendancy of this issue, that she would probably agree with you 100%, which is not easy for her to say. I don't want to speak for her in regards to whether it's best for girls to sit out or not. I think that's a perfectly legitimate position to arrive at, and your voice on that holds a lot of weight. But the point is, this is a tough decision for any female athlete because of all that hard work and all that love they have for their game. So I appreciate your honesty in that answer, and that's what we were hoping for in this episode, is to get us closer to the hearts of these girls who are being asked to do this very, very difficult thing that they should never be asked to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, it's interesting, Sophia, that you're in California, the Golden State, because, we see across America there's a fairly general consensus against boys competing in girls' sports, but it seems like there is a bit of a difference in California. Do you think that there is, and how do you think we go about really dealing with that in California?
Absolutely. We're seeing it happen here, and we're seeing girls' sports not be protected necessarily by our elected officials in the state of California. And so we need to continue to advocate for this issue when we see different examples of it popping up, when they see it happening at the high school level, the college level, whatever it is in the state of California. We need to blast it on social media. We need to let the news know about it, because what's changing hearts and minds on this issue is people seeing it firsthand. When people saw the video clips of the boy outbeating the girls by 8 feet. No one can deny that. No one can deny that that is not fair. We're seeing video clips where it's a track race and we're seeing the boy so far ahead of all the girls that you would thought he started at a different starting line or got a head start. And so really having to bring to light these issues. And I think it's so important in the state of California too, because being a college athlete here in California, that is where some of the best athletic programs are. That is where some of the best athletes are growing up. When I knew I wanted to play college soccer, every time there was a college camp where you would go to one of the big fields and there'd be 25, 30, 45 different college coaches from across the nation, my parents were like, this is perfect that we live in California because all the events were here. They were always recruiting from California. That was the reality of it. And that's not to say there's not great programs and great athletes in other states. There absolutely are. But also, every single time when I was playing college soccer, whenever we played an out-of-state team, we would look at the roster and my coach would say, this team is about to have their best game of the season because 65, 75% of the girls are California residents, which means this is going to be the game that their parents, their families, and their friends are going to come out to, which just proves how many athletes come out of the state of California. That's why even if it gets protected in 49 of the other states, it doesn't matter because it's still happening here. Girls are still being affected here and are losing out on opportunities here. And so that means sometimes getting involved politically. That means using your voice on social media and really bringing awareness to when this happens.
That's such a great point, Sophia, because you're so right that California is one of the great sports states in America. It's not to say all the states aren't created equal. They are. We're a federalist system. But some states just have more of a sports infrastructure and resources to draw on. California is one of those. I'm from New York. It's another one of them. I remember when we did get a law passed in a state like Texas to protect girls' sports, it was such a big deal. And we faced more resistance there than probably anywhere else because of this athletic significance of the state of Texas. California is very similar to that, which is why another reason we're glad to have you on is because there is at least some movement on this issue in the state house. Cautiously, at the time of recording, there was some movement the day before. So Sophia, maybe you could just give our audience, before we move on to the next subject, a quick overview of what happened in the state capitol as of yesterday at the time of recording and what might happen in the future.
Yeah, so great news on this issue is California does currently have 2 Save Girls sports bills. So on Monday, March 24th, one of the authors of one of the Save Girls sports bills, he thought that, maybe this bill isn't going to make it through the committee. So I want to make sure every assembly member does vote on it. We want to hear what they have to say on this. And so he forced a floor vote yesterday on the assembly floor, basically making every single assembly member have to vote on his Save Girls sports bill. And his bill basically undoes the AB 1266 that I mentioned earlier. It basically puts it back to you have to play sports teams, locker rooms, and restrooms based off of sex, not gender identity. And so he forced this floor vote. And of course, what we watched happen is not a shock in the state of California. We watched it go down on party lines. Only Democrats voted no, and only Republicans voted yes. We didn't see anyone switch over, nothing like that. We did see some people abstain. We actually saw 2 Republicans abstain as it was voted on. And so we put some pressure on them on social media. We said, these 2 Republicans just abstained from voting on girls' sports. And also, this is a bipartisan idea. Everyone should be together, that boys should not be in girls' sports. Yet in the state of California, this is how it's divided. It is divided by political party, unfortunately. So those 2 Republicans, they switched over. And what we saw 49 Democrats vote no on the Save Girls Sports bill. 20 of the 49 Democrats are women. 20 women voted against protecting young girls in this state. We then saw 18 Republicans did vote yes. There's 20 Republicans in the assembly. The 2 that didn't vote were actually absent from the day. So a lot of people are starting to say they chose not to vote. So that's not true. They were absent from the hearing that day. And so it was heartbreaking to see how the vote went down. It was heartbreaking to watch women vote against girls. And even though this had a floor vote, it is still going to be heard in its committee. So we're going to see on April 1st, both these bills will go through their assembly committees. And we're hoping to really make a difference, whether the bills pass through or not. We want to make the stories of female athletes heard and make sure the California Assembly knows what they're voting either for or against.
Well, that's an exciting update. It should be exciting committee hearings too. So for folks interested in this issue, I would argue for the whole country, not just California. California is a bellwether. Be sure to follow California Family Council, because I know you, Sophia, and your team will keep your supporters up to date on the movements of bills like that. So, which, speaking of bills, we should move on to our second story that we're having you on here to talk about, Sophia, which is the proposed Assembly Bill 727 or 727. And this bill, the way I understand it, would force every school in the state to print the LGBT activist org, the Trevor Project's suicide hotline on the back of their ID cards. Every student in the state has this phone number printed and labeled as a suicide hotline from the Trevor Project, which is an LGBT group. There are no religious exemptions in the bill. And Sophia, we've relied very heavily on California Family Council's very good explanatory blog post, which we didn't even get to cover in full because it was so thorough. And we linked to it though in that show. We'll link to it in this one as well for those listening and want to learn more. But since we have you on here, we just wanted to see, maybe you could tell us more. First of all, I mean, where the heck did this idea come from?
Yeah, so for AB 727, it's authored by Assemblymember Mark Gonzalez. He's a new Assemblymember this year. He is over the Los Angeles area. And, you know, these legislators don't just think of all of these ideas on their own. They rely on other organizations, nonprofit organizations, groups, even their constituents to say, hey, here's an issue we need solved. Can you put a bill into place like this? And so Assemblymember Mark Gonzalez, he is a part of the California LGBTQ caucus, which is with a bunch of different assembly members and state senators. The California LGBTQ caucus has officially said, yes, we're putting our full support and sponsorship behind this. Yet, the main players that helped with this bill was actually the Sacramento and the Los Angeles LGBT Center. And so these centers said, we're seeing a lot of people that live in LGBT lifestyles with mental health issues. Let's put the Trevor Project hotline on the back of all the students' IDs. And so, again, I want to note, it is not just for all the public schools in California. Like you said, there's no religious exemption. So right now they're saying Christian schools, Catholic schools, Mormon schools, Muslim schools, all these schools that what their religion believes doesn't align with what the Trevor Project and the LGBTQ caucus is doing. You don't have a say, you're forced to do this, which is a violation of the First Amendment. Yet, so we're seeing these outside groups come in and provide these ideas. And so the Trevor Project is, if you go online to the Trevor Project, and if you're a child watching this or a young adult watching this, I don't recommend, but if you're a parent who's concerned, if you go online, the first thing the website pops up is click escape 3 times fast to get this off your computer. Why would they have a website targeted towards children in education, high schoolers, college students, that you would have to quickly remove from your computer? Thus, they know the website they have is something that parents aren't okay with, that parents wouldn't be happy with their children being on it. And so the main point of this bill, what the LA LGBT Center is saying, what the SAC LGBT Center is saying, and what this assembly member is saying is for all of those that identify in the LGBTQ lifestyle that are struggling with mental health or suicide ideation, let's give them this Trevor Project hotline, which doesn't make sense if you look at the facts and the stats. We have the facts that now show that mental health does decrease and get worse post trying to transition, post identifying as the opposite sex. I mean, the American Urological Association did a study in California from 2012 to 2018 that literally shows that post vaginoplasty and phalloplasty, which is when they're trying to change what their sex is. And again, no one can ever change their sex, but they're attempting to undergo these medical surgeries. It literally shows that suicide rates double post surgeries. We also see from the American College of Pediatrics that 80 to 95% of young adults dealing with gender dysphoria end up finding resolution from this and coming to terms with their natal sex as long as they are not affirmed in the opposite sex. And so now we're going to put these hotlines on students' IDs where when they call and say, I'm suicidal because I identify as this, or I try to medically change my body with this, instead of saying, well, let's get to the root of that. Why were you trying to do that? Let's get you back to recognizing that you were made perfectly. There wasn't a mistake made when you were made. They go down this LGBTQ ideology that's not going to help the child in that moment. And then again, it's a website that they don't even want parents to see how to exit quickly. That should be a red flag right there. And so it's heartbreaking that this bill is being introduced, because I believe it's going to lead to more harm for children than good. And yet, when the assembly member introduced it for the LGBTQ caucus press conference, he made it clear that the reason he's introducing this bill is because he is a proud Catholic. And that broke my heart, because he is evidently not reading his Bible or going to a church that's teaching biblical reality, biblical truth, because we know as Christians, as Catholics, that God made no mistake when he made us. He did not make us in the opposite bodies, and that marriage is designed between man and woman, because we know that is the best unity. And so there's evidently a lot going on behind the scenes with this assembly member, with the SAC and LA LGBT centers. And so we need to continue to just bring awareness to what is happening here.
Wow, Sophia, you covered a lot of ground there, and I love how you just brought it back to the fact that, we're perfect as we were created by God to be. And really, when you view this issue from that standpoint, it really shows how anti-God this whole thing is. And of course, destruction is going to ensue when we go against our Creator and how He created things to be. So, I think there's another aspect we wanted to pull out was that about the Vista Unified School District, which the California Family Council, you guys have reported on. And they use the Trevor Project as an entryway to push the LGBTQ ideology on students. Can you tell us a little bit more about that particular situation?
Yeah, this is a perfect example of what the Trevor Project is truly up to and what they're trying to push. This, as you said, was in the Vista Unified School District. That's down in Southern California. And we are seeing what happened is a freshman class, and through the Trevor Project, they were practicing how to come out, whether that's come out as lesbian or gay, whether that's coming out as you think you're the opposite sex. But so really practicing this whole coming out thing. And again, this wasn't done in an LGBTQ club on campus, which I would have still personally had issues with. But that would have been children who were chosen and choosing to go to that. This was done in the classrooms. A whole lesson about how to come out, about sexuality, because that's what this is at the end of the day. And honestly, there shouldn't be a lesson for how to me as a woman to go into the classroom and say, I like men and this is the boy in the classroom I like. Why are we talking about sexuality in the classrooms? They wouldn't be okay if we were talking about the hetero side of it, and yet they want to push the homosexual side of it. It's really interesting how this is playing out and how this is working. And so quite a few students in the classroom, they protested, they walked out, they said, we don't want to do this, which makes absolute sense. Why would some of these young girls and guys want to pretend to come out for something they aren't even, something that they're not interested in? Talking about sexuality and who you like in your freshman class. So they protested it, and the school was not happy. They told them they had to be a part of this. They had to get involved. And we saw parents later go to the school board and bring attention and awareness to this, which is why it's so important as parents, when things like this happen, to go to your school board meetings, to bring awareness to this. Because if they didn't, this issue might have not blown up the way it did. And so now we've seen they've partnered with a few different law centers, and they're working to their First Amendment right was violated, these students. And a lot of them said they don't want to participate in this because of their religious beliefs. They don't agree with this. And so that's what the Trevor Project is helping schools do, is teaching schools to do. I remember my senior year of high school, it was about 2017. There was a girl that I had been friends with all 4 years of high school. And she always had a crush on some boy. It was always her, I like this boy, I like that boy. And we were in English class, and this was nothing the teacher had us do, but we had our laptops, and she took this test that basically said, am I lesbian, gay, or bi? And I don't even know why she pulled out her computer and did this test. So she goes through and answers all these questions. And at the end of the test, it says, oh, you're probably bi. And she literally said, I must be bi. Again, I knew her all 4 years and she always had crushes on boys. She was never talking about girls. And maybe that was something that she was thinking deep down, but then just took this random 20 question test. Then all of a sudden, senior high school, she's like, yeah, I guess I like boys and girls. And so I don't think parents and schools necessarily realize the doors that doing something like this in a class of freshman students, pushing the Trevor hotline, what it can open when children's imaginations start to go wild when they're on a website that they shouldn't be on.
Especially when it's ultimately a parent's right and responsibility to be the one to introduce their kids on their time and in the right place, and hopefully in a biblically accurate manner, what intimacy is and what romance is. So that's a great insider scoop, Sophia. We're grateful for that. And that's why I'm so glad you mentioned that the sponsor justified introducing this bill with his professed Catholic faith. I think of I'm a Protestant myself, but I have so many Catholic brothers and sisters that have just stood on the front lines with me for biblically accurate values in the public square. And I think of just how much that must have hurt them for their theology to be so badly misrepresented by this assemblyman. But it's also doubly ironic because this bill does have serious religious liberty implications. And I think when you couch this in faux religiosity, it can draw attention away or deflect from those serious religious liberty concerns. So being from California, Sophia, could you just tell us some more about what those religious liberty impacts would have from if a bill like this were to become enacted? How would this infringe on Christians and other traditional peoples of faith from other religions' right to practice their faith?
Yeah, it would absolutely infringe on Christians and Catholics, any religions, really ability to practice their faith, because now Christian schools and Catholic schools, their kids are having this hotline put on with a phone number to the Trevor Project that really pushes LGBTQ plus advocacy. And those are conversations that maybe now this, let's say, seventh grader, eighth grader, ninth grader is Christian, raised in a Christian home, has been taught what the Bible has to say on these issues. But now they're seeing this, and now they might start thinking, oh, well, maybe this is what's right because this is what's on my school ID, and isn't the school system right? And isn't the education system right? And start going down this spiral. I mean, myself, I went to a Christian school K through eighth grade, and I was so grateful to get a sex ed system that was taught from a biblical stance and taught about God's design. And so to then just counter everything these religious schools are doing with that hotline number, it's heartbreaking, it's interesting, and I think we'll see it get upheld in the courts if they don't remove that part from the language. And it really just goes to show that what they think they're doing is truly right. They're 100% bought into this Trevor Project hotline. And also goes to show if we said, hey, as a Christian organization, we want to introduce a bill that puts a phone number to the local church for every student. So that way, if they're going through mental health issues, they can call the local church. The same assembly member that introduced this, the same assembly members and senators that are supporting this, I'm sure would lose their mind. And so we need to make sure we stand for our religious liberty, because we'll only continue to have it as long as we stand for it.
That's so good, Sophia. I totally agree with you that, I think this is the beauty of America is like, and as someone who's not American originally, I see this as like, it's the land of opportunity. You can go after things. You can also let things creep in because everyone kind of has the opportunity. And if you don't speak out against those things which are, going to infringe your opportunity, then they're going to take over. And so I feel like we covered so many important things in this podcast. And I think this issue is so much more far reaching than we often realize. And I'm really grateful to you bringing out some of those deeper aspects. And I mean, even from the standpoint of like a Catholic bringing this bill up. that to me is just crazy and is just a testament of how far some of us have gotten lost in these other ideologies, which are so anti-God. And so I hope that through this podcast, we can really enlighten people. And I think something else you mentioned about, even just a kid being exposed to something in almost, an innocent sense, you have absolutely no idea where that's going to lead to. And the thoughts that it just places in your mind. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine a while ago, and she very much is a believer in the Lord, and is like heterosexual, but some things that she had been exposed to started, creating doubts in her around all of that. And I was just reassuring her, like, girl, no, that is not true. And it's crazy how these kinds of the media can just plant things in our minds, plant seeds in our hearts. And unless we're guarded against that, which as parents, it's I was going to say our job, but I'm not a parent yet. But one day, it's parents' job to be that guardrail for their kids, because when you're a kid, you don't know the difference. And so I'm so excited that we're able to talk about this and enlighten parents on what is really going on. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I do just want to add to that. There might be someone listening that's like, okay, Sophia just sat here and told us about all the craziness that's coming out of California. Thank God I don't live in California. Take a step back, and I want you guys to know, and I don't like telling parents this because I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. It is happening in every single state across the nation, whether you are in a red state or a blue state, and not necessarily the exact instances we talked about here, like the Trevor Project hotline being put on school IDs and situations like that. But if your child is in a public education system or has a phone in their hand, they are able to access all the same stuff and they are learning the same stuff. So not to scare parents, not to make parents think there's no way to protect their child, but to be really aware of what is happening, be really aware of what you're giving your child when you give them a phone, and to be aware that just because you thought you moved to this little Christian town or a little conservative town that your child's in the clear and safe, but that's not how things work nowadays with social media, with phones, and even with legislation across the nation. And with this Trevor Project thing, the Trevor Project is really trying to get their name out there to people. I went to a makeup store the other day to get like a new, just like little lipstick. And all my makeup I use is like healthy, clean, Christian owned makeup besides these lipsticks I like. And I went to the makeup store, I got the lipstick. And as I'm checking out, they said, would you like to round up for your donation, or round up your final for a donation? And I normally say no to them because I never really know what these different organizations are, and I don't want to be donating to something that I'm not fully aware of. But I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like 18 cents. Sure, why not? Just round it up. And they said to the Trevor Project. And I thought, wow, the Trevor Project is really, truly trying to indoctrinate everywhere. I mean, this happened last week. And so as parents, even if you're sitting here and you're like, well, I'm not in California, rethink that and just recognize the impact some of these different centers and organizations are trying to make on your children and trying to get in your children's minds.
And yeah, in fact, if for parents, they want to do a deep dive and figure out if their school district might be doing this, I can recommend a tool from one of our allied organizations called Parents Defending Education. They have what they call an indoctrination map on their website, and it will tell you by state and by school system if the school system in which you live is participating in pushing this gender ideology in their schools. So, Sophie, I hate to have us end on such a dark note, but we are so grateful for your expertise. And that's why I want to say Sophia has a lot of great projects. And Sophia, maybe just right now before we let you go, could you tell us where people could find and follow you and your work, what projects you have going, and where they can find and follow California Family Council?
Yeah, so if you head to californiafamily.org, that's where you'll see our website and all of our posts. But if you head on any of your social media platforms, Facebook, X, YouTube, Instagram, to California Family Council, you'll see updates from us about what is happening in California, what is happening in schools here, what's happening with sports, as well as I host through California Family Council a podcast called This Is a Woman podcast. And we talk about all things womanhood from a Christian perspective, from a truth perspective, from a basic common sense understanding of what it means to be a woman. And so you can find This Is a Woman podcast on YouTube, on all podcast platforms, as well as on Instagram.
Excellent. Well, Sophia, we're so grateful for your time. Thank you for joining us on House to Home, and thank you to our listeners for joining us as well. This has been another episode of House to Home, which is a podcast of Family Policy Alliance Foundation. As always, I'm Joseph Kohm, and my co-host has been Grace Youngson. We're here every week from the Family Policy Alliance Foundation feed, everywhere you get your pods. If you like our show, we just ask that you please hit the subscribe button. Leave us a 5-star review because it really helps us grow and reach more people with the show. You can also connect with FPAF on social media. We'll put our social media handles in the show notes and description. And we'll put links to everything we've talked about today, including the 2 stories and Sophia's social media and California Family Council's social media in our show notes as well. So thank you to everyone for listening. We'll be back again next week.